Alright guys, today we're going to show you how to make a modal in just regular vanilla JavaScript, CSS, and some HTML. So you'll see we have our modal button, you click the overlay, it's going to go away, you click the X, it's going to go away, you click the save button, it's going to go away, click the modal itself, not going to go away because you may want to enter content. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create this as pretty much as fast as we can. I want to thank our long-term sponsor, Dev Mountain Coding Bootcamp. Dev Mountain has been a great supporter of the channel. I've had the pleasure of not only meeting several of their students and partaking in one of their online programs, but also visiting their campus in Provo, Utah, which was beautiful and just fantastic. I highly recommend you looking into Dev Mountain. You can find out more about Dev Mountain's coding bootcamps and their other programs at devmountain.com. Alright guys, so you'll see too much code there, but here you'll see that we just have a pretty much empty shell. The only thing that's in here is that we just set body margin to 0. So how we're going to get going is we're going to create the essential structure. We're going to want our modal to be centered, and we're going to want the overlay to take up the full screen. So typically what you're going to want to do is have a fixed positioned element or absolutely positioned, depending on how you want to handle it. But we're going to have a div here, and I called it modal container, but it's probably more accurate to say it's the overlay. But we'll give this an ID equal to, because we're going to have to target some values of this container dynamically. So you'll see we'll give it an ID here of container, and then within that container, which is also our overlay, we're going to have another div here, and we're going to give that an ID of modal. That's going to be the actual modal content itself. Now our modal is going to have 3 parts to it. It's going to have the body of the content, it's going to have the top row, which may have an X in it or some sort of action toolbar, and then it's going to have the actions. And so we're going to create that as well, nested within our modal here. So we're going to have what I called close modal, and we're going to put an X in there. Specifically, we're going to use some of the it's not ASCII art. Oh my god, I forgot the name of it. But essentially this at times semicolon, which is some sort of character. You'll see we have an X there. I'm forgetting the name of it. I forget this every video. And then we're gonna have our modal content. And in this case, we're just gonna put some mock content, as in smash that like button while you're listening. And of course, while you're at it, hit that notification bell so that you can know next time we build another component. So that's going to be our main body, and then we're going to have what I called modal actions, which is going to be, at the end of the day, just a div that holds a button that is going to just eliminate that. So you see we have some content here. It's obviously not a modal yet. There's going to need to be some styling. And then I had a button here that just was used for demonstration purposes to say, hey, show the modal. That's all the HTML we need. It's done. We're good. Video over. No. First thing we're going to need to do is hide all this content, right? You typically don't want your modal to be displayed right away. And the way that we're going to do that is our modal container, we're going to go ahead and throw a display of none value on that. Oops. So we're going to initialize this to a display of none, which means it's now hidden essentially. And even though you're to go somewhere in here, you see modal containers in the DOM, it just doesn't, it's not visible. It doesn't really exist. Show modal's not doing anything either yet. And what we want to do before we go ahead and do that is we want to give it a background color to give it that sort of generic, slightly opaque gray. So we're going to use RGBA 000, and then I just did 0.9. That's sort of my first go with it. And then it's going to have a fixed position, because we want it to pretty much just take up the whole width and the whole height. And we can just use the VH and the VW, say, hey, take up 100% of the view height and take up 100% of the view width. And make sure that you put the VH and the VW on the right container. So that's our overlay at the end of the day. If we were to take this display, what you would see here is we have this big old overlay that's going on here with this save button that's in there. So not very pretty yet, but you can see that it's there. It's taking in some of the styles. Now our modal, in our example, we're just doing a desktop first approach to this. You typically want to avoid modals as much as you can in mobile, mainly because it's not a great experience a lot of times, and you know, there's better ways of doing it. Now, you know, it's not good UI UX, so we're not worrying about desktop in this case. So if we're saying, hey, our modal is only going to be for our application, maybe we want to just set a min width, right? Still think that's not going to be too bad, so like 300 pixels. And maybe we want to set a min height to be something like 300 pixels. And this is just some stuff. You define whatever you want for our modal. And then we want to make the background white as well. And then we may want to take that out. But one thing we're going to do is within our modal right here, we're going to actually use CSS grid to position all this evenly. So our modal container right here, we're going to use the grid to say where we want this to go. And that's going to be fairly straightforward. So we're going to go ahead and give this a max width of about 80%. We don't want it to really take up the whole screen, and it'll continue to go on and on and on unless we do some margin or something like that. So now that we have that defined, we can give it a display of grid, and then we can just give it some padding. So the padding here, I did 0 on the top, 10 on each side, 10 on the bottom. The reason for the 0 on the top is we want that X button to be pretty flush to the top, right? That's what we want it to go on. And then we're going to give it a grid gap. A grid gap is going to essentially put some space between our grid items, which we haven't defined yet, but we will in a second. Our grid item, this will be grid item 1, grid item 2, and then grid item 3. Now that we have display grid here, we're going to define our grid template row. So we have one more thing here. I'm going to come back to this property that we're going to add in just a second, but we're going to define our template rows. So the way that we're going to do this is that means we're going to be going vertically. So row 1, and we only have one column for our modal because everything's going to stack on top. And so we want this to take up the least amount of space. We want this to scale to how much space it needs because that's our modal content. And then we're only going to have really one row, so we want this to take up as least amount of space. The only way we can do that is auto, 1FR, and then auto. So auto is going to take up the amount of space it needs. 1FR is going to take up the amount of space it needs and stretch out in this case. And then auto is going to take up the amount of space that we need. Excellent. So now that we've done that, we'll come back to some CSS in just a second. This is going to take in block level elements. So these are all divs, which means they're block level elements unless you override it for some reason. And now let's jump a little bit into the JavaScript and write our function. So we're going to, on this button, we're going to have a onClick event that's going to call toggle modal. Now, the reason it's going to be toggle modal is we want to, it doesn't make a lot of sense that we're going to have an overlay that hides it. We're going to have a close button that hides it, and we have this here that opens it. So what we can do instead is, why don't we just write one function that toggles the modal because the state is persisted, and I think that's somewhat important. Now, it's not completely bad to write it, and in fact, as I'm saying this, no, I think this is fine. But oftentimes, a lot of developers will add logic where they don't need to, but this is such a small function, I think that toggle modal is the right way of going about it. So what we're going to do here is we are going to create a const called modal. And this is going to go in, we're going to get the element by ID, and we're going to get the modal container. Because remember, we set display none up here. That's what we need to change to showcase to show our modal. Our modal's there, but you just can't see it. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to get the display value from it. Now, some people may say, oh, that's easy. You go modal.display or modal.style.display. That's not correct. Those are essentially the styles you're directly hitting. What we actually need to do is on the window, we need to get the computed style. That's going to actually get the updated value of our modal. So you're going to pass in your element here. You'll see here, we're passing in our element, and then we want to get, let's zoom out a little bit, the property value of what? Well, it's our display property. So every time I do some vanilla JavaScript, I start thinking that I work in React and Angular and Vue and all those sorts of frameworks. But you can see how this can get a little bit convoluted, and you start writing these very long lines. So this will get us our display value, and we can do that. We can see that if we just go ahead and console log, and then we pass in display value, which now if we go to if we show our console drawer here. Yeah, I don't care about what's new. What did I do? Oh, this needs to be in a function, so it's running this directly. And so this is a good example of something. It's running this before we can actually get this element. This element doesn't exist, so you know, one thing to watch out for if you're trying to do some stuff like that. So toggle modal. And then in here, go ahead and Control X, Control V, Control minus. All right. So now we'll do that. You'll see we get display none. So it's all synced up. It's working. At this point, you probably have an idea of what's going on. You know. So again, one thing I wanted to sort of showcase is that. If we were to console.log modal.style.display, this would go ahead and you see it prints empty, which isn't what we want. And the reason for that is we want to be able to toggle that, right? One function that does both. And empty is just additional logic that we would have to factor in. So what can we do to toggle? It's pretty straightforward at this point. We have our display value. And if it's equal to none, we want to go ahead and set it to grid. So this is going to be a grid item, which will allow our modal here to be placed in the center relatively easily. The vertical and horizontal center. And so if that's the case, we can go ahead and just set this value via the style property, because now we're going to set it each and every time, and we don't have to worry about that. And this value won't ever be empty anymore unless we delete it, right? So we're going to set that to a grid. You'll see we have this, you see it's coming up. It's obviously very ugly still, but it's getting called and it's changing the value. And now we can write an else here that's going to do the same. So if it's not equal to none, if it's equal to none, set it to grid. Else, go ahead and just set modal.style.display equal to none. And so this is going to toggle our value here. Let me see if I do this. Where's our, actually I think it's behind this, but you'll see in a second when we sync up these buttons. And we can do that right now by just adding a simple on-click event. Let's go ahead and get rid of this display value. So that's our entire JavaScript, almost entire, because we have to add some on-click. So we can do on-click. Let's just actually copy this right here. And go ahead and pass that in. Now if we do this and then we hit save, it goes away. We want to do the same on our close modal as well. So show modal, click that. Cool. So we're getting there, right? It's not the prettiest thing, and and on our modal container here, which is essentially our overlay, if we go ahead and click this, it's gone. Now one thing you'll notice is is that when we click in here, it's actually eliminating as well, and that's because of event bubbling, and we're going to showcase in just a second, once we get this looking a little bit better, how we're going to solve that. So now that we've done that, let's go ahead and clean up a little bit of our grid. So now in the case where this is a grid, we can use align self to center, and that's going to horizontally center it. And so if we save that and we go here, you'll see that, or vertically center it, and then justify self, and we go to center, save that, and cool. Another thing I wanted to show you real quick is that you can actually, this is not going to work in like pretty much a bunch of browsers, except I think Chrome, but you can use place self, which is going to take those values in one at a time. So you could do center here, and I think it goes vertical then horizontal. You'll even see that my IDE is like, dude, what are you talking about? Place self center. This will actually duplicate in both spots. But like, say we do center and end, something like that. You'll see that it's going to go over there. So you got your horizontal, vertical. It's going to duplicate it. So we can just do place self center, and that will solve that. And now we have this modal that's getting called and working. The next thing we want to do is just sort of center this X, right? We want this X to look a little bit better. It's also, as we're doing sort of mobile first, it's treating this as text, and we want this to be more like a button, sort of a user interaction. And we can do that. And same thing with the save button, right? So this should behave more like a button, and we could style that pretty easily by, and we want it to be like that in both places. So we'll go ahead and share the style, and we can put cursor to pointer, and that will take care of that, like so. And so you'll see there, that's a button also, right? And there we go there. So let's actually on our X here, and you can see when I hover over, we have our grid. You'll notice that it doesn't have that penny up top, but we still got our gaps between the row gap here. And then we have our, and you know what? Instead of grid gap, really this should be grid dash row gap. We don't need it on the full grid. We only need it on the horizontal because there are no columns. There's just the one column rather. So we want to float this to the right. We want to make it a little bit bigger, I think also. And then we want to handle the issue where we're clicking here and it's closing the modal, because you never know when you might want to put text input or what. So for the close modal for the X, all we're going to do there is we're going to justify it. So we're going to justify self, and we're going to do it to right. By default, it's going to be to the left. And then we'll use font dash size. And instead of writing something arbitrary, one thing I've been doing a lot more often is just using the built-in sizing. So XX large is the largest built-in, I believe. And so you'll see with this nice little X here that's, gives a decent amount of space. And it's all behaving, looking really nice. And then I think that was it for the CSS. So now that we've done that, we're pretty close to being done. And if this was just sort of like a display value modal, maybe it just showed something, popped it up, that'd be fine. But one thing is maybe we have an input bar in here, right? We have something that you want to type and you're like, oh, click into it and it closes. So as I mentioned, that's from event bubbling. Now there's a couple different ways we can handle that. We can use event stop propagation, which will stop when we click on. So what's happening right now is that this is nested within the modal container. And so when we click in here, we're actually clicking technically on the modal container, which causes it to close out. And so we have to stop that. Now what we could do is pass in an event here, or we could pass in the event and we could check. What I decided to do was if you clicked anywhere in the modal, we add an on click, and we just took the event. Now this is an event that's going to exist on the on click event. That's what it's referencing. And we're just going to stop propagation. So it prevents, you see, if you read this here, when dispatching a tree, invoking the method prevents event from reaching any other objects than the current object. What that basically means is that this is only going to call if it's going to stop any click event that's not on this modal from going up, really. That's all it's going to do. And now that we're there, go ahead and save. We have our modal. You can click in here. These are still going to work, and then save's going to work, and click in, the overlay is going to work. And we have now built a custom modal in about 20 minutes here. And that's it. So a couple fun stuff. But as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please drop a like, please share, and let me know what components you want me to build next. I'm trying to do about one a week for a little bit, and get some of you guys familiar with vanilla JavaScript, get some of myself familiar with vanilla JavaScript a little bit more in detail. And as always, I appreciate you. Check out my courses in the description below. See you guys next time. Bye. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. Don't forget to check out my 100 Algorithm Challenge course. Get you prepped for those technical interviews to make sure you get nice offers. I actually just added some new content to it so you can get prepared for those technical phone screens as well. There's a link in the description to get it for just $9.99.